We have our next speaker, Professor Piotr Machura from the University of Katowice in Poland, who's going to, I'm not sure of the title of your paper, but who's going to talk to us, I'm sure, about McIntyre.
Hi, thank you so much, and thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. The website is processing my slides, so you should see my presentation in a second. Can you see the presentation?
Diga para ele começar.
Right. So I've changed my initial topic, which was technology and 2 questions for future ethics, but I thought it would be much more interesting to take some chance to ask more philosophical questions from virtue ethics to our thinking about technology. So
o título da apresentação é Tecnologia com 2 questões sobre virtual ethics.
So the outline of the presentation is as follows. I will start by briefly addressing the main areas of using virtue ethics and ethics of technology, and I will proceed with discussing a topic which seems to be much of interest, which is the possibility of existing virtuous machines. And then I will speak about what I find to be a 3 models of virtue theory as used not to machines but to humans. And I will focus in the last part of my presentation on one of these models, which I call the virtue of extended mind.
Então, esses serão os focos da apresentação. Primeiro, ele vai começar mapeando o uso da ética virtuosa na ética da tecnologia. Em seguida, o foco será o caso das máquinas virtuosas. Em seguida, os 3 modelos da teoria virtuosa na ética da tecnologia. E, por último, o foco da última parte da apresentação será a virtuosidade da mente estendida.
So let's start with asking quite vague questions. Why we should use virtue ethics and ethics of technology at all? As you know, virtue ethics is a relatively latecomer to the field, and most of the classic works in ethics of technology has been done within utilitarian or deontological frameworks. But what we have seen in the last decades is a couple of processes that make it reliable to turn to virtue ethics. I would like to just stress a couple of them. So firstly, the transition from the large scale or professionalized the kind of technologies that we have seen before, like industrial societies, is now changing to the kind of more personal experience in technology in which our everyday experiences are framed by our use of technologies. Oh, I'm doing this pretty much right now. Secondly, there was a typo, sorry for that. The growing complexity of technology means that it becomes an effective agent, even though it's not perhaps autonomous, but effectively it becomes an agent in social life with very debatable accountability. Thirdly, the amount of complexity that the autonomous system face, like in the case of stock market bots, is growing, which means that the interpretations and the more consequences of interpretations that these systems effectively do is problematic. And finally, is the influence of technology on human moral development, on our everyday moral activity.
Então, o título é Por que a ética virtuosa na ética da tecnologia? Na última década, teve alguns processos que levaram à transição de uma larga escala, uma tecnologia profissionalizada, que mudou para uma tecnologia mais pessoal, do jeito que vemos no dia a dia. E a complexidade crescente da tecnologia significa que ela se tornou um agente efetivo na vida social e na responsabilidade limitada. Essas interpretações complexas de sistemas autônomos serão analisadas e a influência da tecnologia também será analisada dentro do desenvolvimento da moralidade humana.
So when we use the virtue ethics to technology, we don't really do this in a single process, and there are various areas in which we do use ethics of virtue ethics in technology. And I would like to pick up on 4 of these areas. The first is these are moral dispositions of designers or engineers, and this is actually quite neglected area. Secondly, is the moral dispositions in human-machine interactions and the kind of the design that we use, focusing on the moral dispositions of users, but also the kind of, in some way, moral dispositions of machines as well. Thirdly, the issue that I'm going to address in a second is the moral autonomy framed in terms of virtuousness of the machines themselves. And finally, is the virtuousness of the human agents in technologically augmented environment, the environment that changed the rules of acting in our everyday life.
Então, o professor vai começar focando em 4 áreas. A primeira delas é as disposições morais dos designers e dos engenheiros. Em seguida, as disposições morais das máquinas, da relação máquina-humano, e as suas disposições não só dos usuários, mas também das máquinas em si. E, em seguida, seguir para a autonomia moral das máquinas em si, no caso, a virtuosidade delas. E, por último, trabalhar a virtuosidade do agente humano no ambiente tecnológico, tecnologicamente contextualizado.
Right, so what kind of virtue ethics that would be? Obviously, in the Western world, that would be dominated by the Aristotelian framework. But as technology is a global phenomenon, we cannot just keep to the one of the frameworks. And as Shannon Valor has famously argued in her 2016 book, the globalized account of virtue ethics need to include at least Buddhist and Taoist ethics, which would be enabling us to refer to the experience of vast majority of people worldwide. And just to remind the basic tenets of the framework, virtue is defined by Aristotle as a stable disposition which enables the agent to do rightfully or to rightfully respond to specific situations. Aristotle obviously distinguishes 2 kinds of virtues, moral and intellectual, among which the most important for us would be phronesis, the virtue of practical reason. What is important here are 2 criteria. The first, what is morally proper is determined by the individual's identity in relation to the model of virtuousness, to the role model for the kind of being the person is, which is themselves grounded in just reasoning on the nature of human being. And the second is the criterion of just reasoning, which is the way in which the agent can realize the capacity for their autonomous acting to be autonomous human being. The second would be the control of emotionality, which allows them to realize their potential, and doing this in a way that maintains social bonds, which are meaningful for their flourishing. And this way, the human being would obtain eudaimonia through life.
Então, que tipo de ética virtuosa é essa? O professor utilizou o trabalho do Aristóteles e a conta globalizada incluía também a ética budista e taoísta. A virtude, segundo Aristóteles, é a disposição estável que permite que o agente responda corretamente às situações específicas. E existem dois tipos de virtudes, a moral e a intelectual, cuja phronesis é a mais importante. Então, ele vai focar em dois tipos de critérios que serão importantes aqui. O primeiro deles é o que é moralmente apropriado, é determinado pela identidade do indivíduo em relação ao modelo de virtuosidade, o que é baseado apenas em razão e na natureza do ser humano. E o segundo critério é apenas a razão em um modo e de uma forma que o agente possa realizar a capacidade para agir autonomamente, tendo controle da sua emocionalidade, o que permite a realização de todo o seu potencial e manter as interações sociais, que permitem uma vida completa, uma eudaimonia.
Right, and as we probably are all aware of, Aristotle mentions three conditions for virtue acting. The first, acting in a virtuous way, the agent needs to have certain knowledge, which is basically the knowledge concerning the situation the agent is in. Secondly, the agent needs to act on the basis of their choice, and the choice would be directed to act in a virtuous way. And thirdly, these actions need to be derivatives of a firm and unchangeable character. Now, that would be summarized by this brief notion from Aristotle, who says that virtuous action consists in doing the right things in the right way, based on the right motivation.
Então, continuando com Aristóteles, ele nomeou as condições para uma atitude virtuosa. Então, são três condições. A primeira diz que o homem deve agir de uma forma virtuosa, a partir da situação, sabendo a situação em que o agente está. Então, requer um conhecimento, um certo conhecimento de contexto, de situação. A segunda condição é a escolha para agir de uma determinada forma virtuosa, novamente a partir desse conhecimento. E o terceiro é um caráter firme e imutável. E Aristóteles sumariza isso, resume isso ao dizer que a ação virtuosa consiste em fazer as coisas certas, do jeito certo, baseado na motivação certa.
Now, this frames the issue of the virtuous machine. And when I'm referring to machines, I'm referring to both the mechanical and digital machines. And whether you'll find it interesting or whether you will find it a good solution or not, the general consensus in literature is that machines cannot be virtuous. But it would be interesting philosophically to ask why this is the case. And there are two issues in which we can address this topic. Firstly, the question is, should machines be virtuous? Should we act to the effect of constructing a virtuous machine? Or should we rather wish for the kind of machine that would act in accordance with virtue? This is the distinction introduced by Robert Audi in mid-1990s. But this is very interesting how that works in ethics of technology. And you may witness this in many debates on the ethics of technology, in which what we really expect is not autonomy, not the moral autonomy comparable to that of humans, but rather we expect machines to act morally well. But the question is, what would it take for the machines to become fully autonomous if we frame the autonomy in terms of virtuousness?
Então, as máquinas podem ser virtuosas, e aqui o professor define máquinas tanto como as mecânicas quanto as digitais. E o consenso geral é que não. Mas é interessante perguntar por quê. por que as máquinas não podem ser virtuosas. E tem alguns problemas que aparecem para o qual não é possível adereçar essa questão, esse tópico. E alguns dos problemas são: as máquinas devem ser virtuosas. E, nesse caso, o que esperamos das máquinas não é autonomia, é que elas ajam moralmente corretas, que elas sejam moralmente corretas em suas ações. E o segundo tópico seria: as máquinas devem agir em acordância e concordância com a virtude. E aqui tem um conceito de Robert Alcuin, lançado nos anos 90, em a questão da moralidade das máquinas. Então, se espera um nível de autonomia das máquinas, completa autonomia, mas para quem ela é direcionada para essa funcionalidade?
So there's a number of aporias towards the full autonomy of the full virtuousness of machines, and I will address some of them because they seem to offer some insights into the question of important topics in ethics of technology. So Bertrand Mallet and Martin Scheutz stress in their paper that it is impossible for today to design a programming language that will be capable of using moral categories because they are too vague and context dependent. So for instance, we cannot decide how would the language would operate with the term lying because we have different kinds of lying. Not necessarily each case of lie is morally wrong, because, for instance, as Professor McIntyre stressed in one of his books, it would be not necessarily morally wrong to lie to our aunts about whether we like their new hats. What the key thing is here, however, is that in moral life, we build on overlapping diverse values and social practices. We need to negotiate goods and virtues typical to them. The problem with the machines is that it's not the part of the being machine. Being a machine is to have a specific task assigned to do, right? Machines cannot choose whether they are going to do what they are assigned or not. Secondly, the attitude that machines have toward reality is not something that we can call attitude at all. It's unhindered by emotional connections or affiliations. They are pragmatically oriented toward the task they are supposed to do. And thirdly, the concept of a virtue as a form of self-control, and machines do not have emotions that they would have to control, make it futile to use this language for machines.
Então, temos aqui algumas aporias que são conceitualizadas pelo Mayo and Schultz em 2009, que diz que é impossível, hoje em dia, criar um idioma de programação, uma língua de programação capaz de usar categorias morais, porque é um conceito muito vago e dependente de contexto. Então, existe uma relação moral na vida, um problema na moralidade da vida, que diz que os diversos valores e práticas sociais, eles se sobrepõem, e é preciso negociar o tempo todo para ter uma priorização do que deve ir acima do outro. Então, de acordo com as máquinas, temos aqui 3 problemas para a moralização das máquinas. O primeiro deles é que as máquinas não podem escolher. As máquinas são designadas tarefas específicas e elas não podem escolher o que elas vão fazer. O segundo é que a abordagem pragmática das máquinas da realidade não é afetada por conexões emocionais ou afiliações. E o terceiro é que o conceito de virtude, como uma forma de autocontrole, o que as máquinas não possuem, leva até uma resposta direta e imediata até o usuário.
The second kind of aporias was raised by Mihaela Konstantinescu and Roger Crisp, building on the question of or the doubts concerning the building a rightful motivation in machines. Well, the fundamental question is obviously whether machines have any motivation at all. But what is important to highlight here is that machines cannot flourish. They are defined in their form of being, they are defined in their tasks. Then it is doubtful whether they have any interest, any kind of goods toward which they aim, except for those programmed by designers. Secondly, a moral person should act on the basis of internalized values. Existing machines do not have the potential which could be expressed as a meaningful to them. Sorry, that's another typo. There is no meaningful thing in the machines acting. Rather, they have processing power, and they also do not have significant for them social bond. They are what they are in the form of being. And thirdly, practical wisdom, the phronesis, which is basically a matter of coherence of practical attitude, which is necessary for virtuous action, cannot be obtained in the machines because they do not negotiate between different areas of the experience.
Então, a segunda aporia é baseada em Constantinescu e Chris, de 2022, e ela levanta questões acerca da construção de uma motivação certa nas máquinas. E a primeira questão é que as máquinas não podem florescer. Elas são definidas na sua forma de ser, elas já são definidas. E é duvidoso se elas têm algum interesse, exceto aqueles programados já pelos seus designers. Segundo, uma pessoa moral deveria agir com base na internalização, com base em seus valores internalizados. Existindo as máquinas existentes, na verdade, não têm o potencial para negociar, para poderem se expressar de forma significativa para elas. Eles, ao invés disso, têm poder de processamento. E eles também não têm social bonds, interações sociais significativas para elas, para as máquinas. E terceiro, a sabedoria prática, que é coerente com a atitude, é necessária para uma ação virtuosa, o que requer uma experiência de vida, reflexão profunda e um tipo de narrativa identitária que permite a conexão de experiências diferentes, no nível muito alto de requerimento de interpretação de habilidades interpretativas.
Right, so the first set of questions that I would like to address concerning the virtue ethical account in ethics of technology would be as follows. Are we ready for machines capable of being virtuous? Like, what would it take for a machine to have this level of autonomy, which would enable us to call it virtuous? And secondly, would we like to create such machines? Are we ready in economic and social sense to have this kind of machines?
Então, as primeiras questões, o primeiro conjunto de questões que o professor gostaria de trabalhar nesse sentido seria: nós estamos preparados para máquinas capazes de agir virtuosamente? O que demandaria para que as máquinas tivessem esse nível de autonomia? E a letra B: será que por que nós gostaríamos de criar? Por que nós criaríamos tais máquinas? Será que estamos preparados?
So let's consider it in more detail. Consider the possibility of virtuous machines. Consider there is a machine which could be virtuous. It seems to follow that this kind of machine would be morally better than at least some of people. If that is the case, isn't that undermining the concept of machine at all? Machine basically is something that we build to work for us, right? So it's a kind of tool, or as Bryson, her famous paper stresses, machines should be slaves. So why should we build or expect to be built the kind of machine that could be virtuous? But another thing is that if the machine would gain this kind of autonomy that would allow them to make the kind of choices in terms of Aristotelian prohairesis which define their own character. That would also mean that they will be able to decide wrongfully, and that would open us to the possibility of vicious machines. But this kind of viciousness could not be considered a design defect, because they will be fully autonomous, and yet in their autonomy deciding to do wrong.
Então, considere a possibilidade de existência das máquinas virtuosas. Essa moralidade das máquinas seria melhor do que a de alguns homens? E para quem seria? Já que a possibilidade de máquinas virtuosas completamente minaria o próprio conceito de máquina, uma vez que as máquinas, do jeito que são atualmente, elas foram criadas para fazer trabalhos por nós, para serem usadas como ferramentas. Logo, seriam as máquinas escravas? E no caso de uma possibilidade de autonomia das máquinas, elas teriam a possibilidade, seriam permitidas a fazer escolhas, a definir o seu próprio caráter. E, nesse caso, elas poderiam escolher errado, tomar decisões erradas, e criaria a possibilidade de máquinas perversas, viciosas. E, nesse caso, o vício não pode ser considerado um defeito de design, porque elas são autônomas.
The next step would be asking what would be the justification or rationale behind creating the kind of machine that would be able of being virtuous. What is interesting in stating this topic, this question, is that if you look at the debate on the machine agency, it's generally framed in terms of ethics of responsibility. And since 1970s, most of the debates in ethics of technology are predominantly framed within the framework offered by ethics of responsibility. So what we discuss really is the protection against the machine error, not the full autonomy, not the possibility of being a responsible agent. But if that is so, then the economic and technical rationale behind producing such devices would be very tricky, because it would be at odds with the general goal of technology, which is basically devoted to serving human needs. The similarity here, or the kind of analogy, would be that of embryo engineering. Right? And there are some people who object this embryo engineering on the basis that there is kind of autonomy in human being that reaches beyond our ability to design and to predict the future, whether that is on the basis of on religious faith or on some epistemic limitations. We don't want to, basically most of the people don't want to allow for embryo engineering, simply because we don't know how that would influence the autonomy of future humans. But this is not the case with the machines. Machines are being produced for our use, and they do not have this kind of autonomy, which would be comparable to that of human beings. And finally, designing autonomous or virtuous machines results. The idea of designing autonomous machines seem to stem from kind of a religious motives. Like it seems in some of the debates, especially in this transhumanism movement, that they have a the kind of similarity to the religious beliefs, in the sense that they expect some kind of electronic teacher or savior that would fix the issues that people cannot fix themselves. Or another way, they stem from a very pessimistic social diagnosis that we built our world in the way that we cannot fix, so we expect some external agent, in this case, most probably the digital agent, to fix it for us.
Então, entra a questão do porquê, a questão da justificação para criar máquinas autônomas. Atualmente, o debate das máquinas, do agenciamento de máquinas, é sobre responsabilidade, sobre proteger contra os erros. e não ficar bem sucedido em questão da autonomia completa, a possibilidade de defeito ou danos. A economia e a racionalização técnica por trás da produção de tais aparelhos, versus o objetivo geral da tecnologia. Isso pode ser se assemelhado muito à questão da engenharia de embriões, porque no caso da engenharia de embriões, a similaridade é que a humanidade rejeita no caso com o argumento de que a autonomia, que a engenharia tira a autonomia dos seres humanos. No caso das máquinas, isso não seria possível porque as máquinas já não têm autonomia. Então, não tem como utilizar o argumento de que não se sabe como isso iria influenciar a autonomia dos seres humanos. E criar máquinas autônomas, ou virtuosas, no caso, resulta em debates que são ou de motivos religiosos, no quais eles esperam um salvador, um professor, para dizer o que eles podem fazer, o que se pode fazer ou não. No caso, consertar problemas que não se pode consertar sozinhos. E é para isso que se criam as máquinas, esperando um agente externo para consertar esses problemas. E também o debate também pode vir de diagnósticos sociais bem pessimistas, no caso de que a humanidade não pode ser consertada do jeito que está e que espera esse agente externo.
So it seems that the debate on the possibility of virtuous machines is pretty much closed. It offers some intellectual, philosophical insights, but not necessarily many possibilities of applying virtue ethics. And it's much more fruitful to turn into humans and look at the ways in which we can apply virtue ethics to humans developing in a technologically augmented environment.
Então, o debate parece bem acirrado e é preciso um pensamento, uma reflexão filosófica para isso. Então, é bem mais frutífero estudar os humanos que trabalham sobre essa questão.
So this is the second set of questions. This time I start with that, not end with that. The first question that would be, should we consider the technology an agent employs when evaluating the morality of their actions? And if so, what is the role of technology in this process? Is it just a tool? Is it a scaffolding? Or is it a constituting the morality of the deed? Second, what ethical framework we should employ to assess this complex relationship between agents and the technology they utilize?
Então, esse é o segundo conjunto de questões que serão tratados aqui. E o primeiro diz respeito a: devemos considerar a tecnologia como um agente que emprega quando se avalia a moralidade de suas ações. E, se for dessa forma, qual é o papel da tecnologia no processo? É uma ferramenta, é um scaffolding, é a constituição cooperativa? E segundo, que tipo de trabalho ético deve ser empregado para acessar esse relacionamento complexo entre agentes e a tecnologia que eles utilizam?
It seems to me that the way of using the virtue ethics to this area can split into three models. And I call it phronetic model, the technomoral virtue, and the extended virtue model. The first one would stem from the recent works by Maria Silvia Vaccarezza and Mario Di Caro on phronesis. And they take phronesis as a general moral competence, which is prior to its realization in specific virtues. Therefore, we can assume that there might be kind of general moral competence which should be prior and should be developed prior to any engagement with technology. Then it would make us this model kind of a hardcore humanistically model, in which first we want people to have kind of moral competence, and then technology would be considered just a tool interacting. It would be just a technical aspect which would take into account. The second model stems from Shannon Balog's book I referred to before, and this is the way of addressing the changes introduced by the technology in the core human practices and building on them on the basis on the classical virtue catalog to find the way of adjusting this classical catalog to this changing environment. And finally, the extended virtue model, the one which I'm going to address in detail, which is built on extended mind thesis by Clark and Chalmers, and according to which a piece of technology may work as an extracranial model, which is constitutive for virtual acting.
Temos aqui, então, 3 modelos da ética virtuosa da tecnologia, os quais o professor chama de 1. Phronetic Model, o modelo frenético. 2. A virtuosidade tecnomoral. E 3. O modelo de virtuosidade estendida. O primeiro se trata da competência moral anterior à realização da sua competência específica e, portanto, anterior ao relacionamento com tecnologia, relativo à moralidade, competência moral geral, de Vacareza e Descartes. O segundo, a virtuosidade tecnomoral, é a virtude ajustada às práticas sociais, transformadas pelo uso extensivo da tecnologia, de Varro. E o terceiro, a virtuosidade, o modelo da virtuosidade estendida, é um pedaço de tecnologia que pode funcionar como um módulo extracranial co-constitutivo da virtude.
Right. So, just to make things a bit more quicker, I will build on extended mind thesis in its so-called first wave, which is basically the one which was addressed by the Clark's and Chalmers' paper. And it's based on 5 tenets: the active externalized causal coupling, parity principle, and portability and reliability, among which I choose just 2 to address: active externalism and parity principle. Active externalism says that the extracranial modules may work effectively as parts of human mind. The parity principle says that to the effect, factually taken, there is no difference between extracranial and incranial modules.
Então, temos aqui a tese da mente estendida, que aqui o professor vai entrar em mais detalhes, e ele vai focar que temos 5 focos, mas ele vai focar a apresentação dele no externalismo ativo e no princípio de paridade. O externalismo ativo diz que as máquinas funcionam mais efetivamente como parte da vida humana, e o princípio de paridade diz que não tem diferença entre incentivos extracraniais e intracraniais.
So it is important to notice that in the debate on using extended mind thesis in ethics, so far the focus was put mostly on the levels of integration, on the role of technological part of coupling in effective acting of the entire assemblage. And this might be addressed by works, for instance, by Richard Hirschman. It was rooted in third-personal view, which is typical to the ontological debates in philosophy of technology and ethics of responsibility, which I addressed before. However, it seems to me that to make progress in virtue ethics, it would be important to pick up on Scorbuck's question, which is the title of his paper, "Where are virtues?" And by addressing of this, we may see how the mind and active parts of human being are mediated by the body and then by the technique or technology. And this highlights the importance of the physical aspect of virtuous acting and first personal perspective, which calls for including at least some of the tools offered by phenomenology.
Então, além da análise funcional, o título, até agora, o foco estava na integração, nos níveis de integração e no papel tecnológico do coupling, da ligação, de acordo com os ensinamentos de Hermes em 2015. A terceira visão, a visão da terceira pessoa, é baseada em debates ontológicos na filosofia da tecnologia e em debates e na ética da responsabilidade, os quais o professor falou anteriormente. Contudo, para fazer progressos nessa área, é importante trabalhar a questão do scoreboard de 2019. Onde estão as virtudes? E, por último, isso ressalta a importância do aspecto físico da virtuosidade, de agir virtuosamente, e da perspectiva em primeira pessoa.
So let's get back to the three conditions outlined by Aristotle concerning the virtuous acting. I'm not going to repeat them, but what is important to notice that traditionally, when we discuss these three conditions, we focus on rightful decision and motion control. But what is omitted from these pictures are the resources that are needed for such a virtuous acting. For instance, just time and attention that we need in order to address certain situation. Also, the role of what Sherry Turkle called evocative objects, the objects which call for acting in a certain way. Also, what is omitted from this picture is the situational embeddedness and bodily aspect of practical attitude, the sense of being in a certain situation. It's not only a matter of cognition, but also of the bodily presence and bodily tensions that are built because of the situation the agent is in.
Então, voltando para Aristóteles, fazendo uma revisitação da atitude virtuosa em Aristóteles, existem três focos na questão da decisão certa e do controle emocional. Porém, tem alguns fatores que são omissos, como os recursos. No caso aqui, por exemplo, o tempo e a atenção deveriam ser dados para essa questão, e os objetos evocativos, de acordo com Turkle. E também, outro fator omisso é a questão situacional, a questão da necessidade do contexto situacional e do aspecto corpóreo da atitude prática.
Just to offer perhaps one or two brief examples. We cannot be generous if we have nothing to share. So the resources available to the engine make it possible for them to act generously. And similarly, in the fearful situation, in the situation of a danger, whether we act courageously or not, may be decided on the basis of weapon availability. And without it, the decision of a certain way of acting may be very different.
Então, temos aqui alguns recursos e tecnologias, como mencionado, o tempo e a atenção, a questão da generosidade, e em caso de perigo, temos a questão das armas e da coragem, e por último, a pontualidade ou gentileza e a observação.
Considering the situational embeddedness and bodily aspect, the recognition of the kind of situation the agent is in is crucial to defining a relevant field of virtue, the kind of situation to which certain virtue applies. And what is important in this recognition of the situation is not only the purely cognitive attitude of the agent, but also the affordances of and evaluation of the agent's own abilities. Like, for instance, in the case of danger, the kind of reaction that the agent would undertake is not only based on their personal attitude, but also, as I said, on the availability of weapon, but also it might be based on the assessment of their own fitness. Is the agent able to withstand to the danger, or does it consider themselves to be too weak and will choose to flee? So the practical conduct is really being ready to act in a certain way, which means it's not only a matter of the decision, as Aristotle himself would stress, but also it consists in distribution of attention, being careful to certain markers of the situation. Secondly, it will consist in tension building, bodily preparedness to react in a certain way. And thirdly, it would consist in recognizing certain elements of the surrounding as resources for acting.
Então, aqui nós temos a questão do enraizamento situacional e do aspecto corpóreo da atitude prática. É necessário o reconhecimento do tipo de situação que o agente está e um campo relevante de virtude baseado nas possibilidades de atuação disponíveis. Por exemplo, temos a situação de perigo, em que o agente deve se situar e observar tanto os recursos quanto a sua própria fitness, o seu cabimento naquela situação, a sua capacidade de se envolver naquela situação, se ele é forte o suficiente, se ele cabe naquela situação. Então, a avaliação de suas próprias habilidades, das próprias habilidades do agente. E isso leva a uma conduta prática de estar pronto para agir de um certo modo, que requer a distribuição de atenção, observar os pontos de contexto, os marcadores de contexto, a construção de tensão e reconhecer os recursos.
So, sustaining a virtuous activity is a very complex issue. And Aristotle says you need to fall from firm and unchangeable character, but he barely mentions, well, that would be perhaps stressed too much. But what would take to build an unchangeable character requires habit-building nudges. Aristotle himself is focused on the decision and accustoming the agent themselves to the certain kind of reactions, but also it might be the case of the nudges coming from the environment, which builds certain kind of attitude in the agent, and this might be outsourced. So, for instance, I might outsource some of the nudges which build my attitude to my smartphone, for instance. And that would work along the line with parity principle, which would make no effective difference between the work of my decision as such and working this nudges coming from the outsourced modules. So the extended virtue thesis would work as follows. Virtue might be ascribed to both human engines and human technological assemblages if they functionally work the same way. But then it seems to me that the three conditions need to be taken into account. Firstly, and that would go against the mainstream interpretation of Aristotelian ethics, it would give priority to local virtues, to virtues connected with certain areas of human acting. Secondly, it would require integration with body schema, and here is where the Merleau-Ponty's phenomenology comes into picture. And thirdly, it requires us to ask about the relation between objectivization of certain actions or certain decisions and technology.
Então, para sustentar a atividade virtuosa, Aristóteles fala que é preciso um caráter firme e imutável. Porém, isso requer estímulos de construção de hábitos no agente. E esses estímulos podem ser fora de controle, fora de fonte, podem vir de fora, podem ser externos. E isso leva até o princípio da paridade, que já foi mencionado anteriormente, que diz que não há diferença efetiva entre o trabalho dos módulos extra e intracranial. E também tem a tese da virtuosidade estendida, que diz que a virtude pode ser descrita com tanto os agentes humanos como as montagens humanas tecnológicas. E para isso seriam necessárias 3 condições: a priorização das virtudes locais, a integralização com o esquema corpóreo e a objetivação de certas escolhas com a afronesis tecnológica.
So, a couple of hints concerning the integration with body schema. What would require this model to work would be the habitual usage as our first requirement for incorporating a certain piece of technology into this virtuous assemblage. So the most obvious example would be that of smartwatch, which nudges us with certain kind of information concerning our health, for instance, or concerning our activity. The second factor would be personalization. Obviously, technology is built to a certain standard, and would be important to work on this in the way which require our personal way of using it, obviously to a certain degree. Thirdly, is the trust. The tools usually is something that we use to a degree that that seems reasonable. In this respect, the pieces of technology that we rely on would have to be much more trustful, much more stable in the work. The fourth requirement is transparency, in the sense that my glasses are transparent, not in the sense that they are made of glass, obviously, but in the sense that for most of the people wearing glasses, they don't have the sense of wearing them for most of the day. We just use them, we just look at the world around us, and we don't have this constant feeling or constant consciousness of using the glasses. They are somewhere there, but they are not effectively making any difference in our own way of feeling the world. And the last thing, which seems to be omitted in the debate so far, is the distinction between coupling and addiction. Especially when we refer to the kind of technologies such as smartphones. In many cases, there will be a very blurred line between constructing a complex human technological assemblage, which will work along the line that I addressed, and addiction, in which the technology takes the domination. And the basic difference will be that in terms of coupling, it is still the human which organizes the way in which this assemblage work, whereas in terms of addiction, there is a kind of stress from the technology for being used.
Então, aqui nós temos alguns pontos para a integralização do esquema corpóreo. O primeiro é o uso habitual. No caso aqui, ele dá o exemplo dos smartwatches, que eles dão algumas informações sobre saúde, você precisa dele o dia inteiro, você usa para várias coisas. Em seguida, a personalização, porque nós usamos a tecnologia é construída para um certo padrão, de acordo com o usuário, até certo ponto. Em seguida, a confiança, porque a tecnologia, as máquinas, são construídas devem passar uma questão de confiança e de estabilidade, para que o usuário se sinta confortável. Em seguida, a transparência, e aqui o professor dá o exemplo dos óculos dele. Os óculos são transparentes, mas não nesse sentido de transparência de ter que ser de vidro ou ter que ser transparente, mas no sentido de que você vai esquecer que está usando. É uma ferramenta ali que te permite não estar constantemente consciente de que você está usando ela. E em seguida temos os conceitos de acoplamento versus adição, a dominação da extensão. E aqui ele dá o exemplo dos smartphones, porque no acoplamento é o ser humano que organiza as informações. E na adição tem um foco maior ali na tecnologia.
So as I said, coupling addiction distinction seems to be overseen by our dysfunctional attitude, which is dominating in debate on extended mind thesis, and it seems to it seems to stem from the ontological equilibrium that is seek for between the human and technological part of the coupling. Therefore, extended virtue thesis. It is the modules that that need to be or that are supposed to be functionally equivalent, not the agency of these two parts of the coupling. And on the basis of this, I proposed the distinction between agent being attached to or connected with a piece of technology. And when the agent is attached to, he or she has a kind of compulsion, just as in the case of the youngsters working with their smartphones, in which they just cannot get rid of scrolling the newsfeed. Whereas when the agent is connected with a certain piece of technology, he or she has a feeling of cooperation, a sense of integration, similar to that we have with glasses. And it also may have the feeling of extension in acting, like in the case of the smartwatches, which are involved in building persistence in runners.
Então, continuando com a integralização do esquema corpóreo e com a questão do acoplamento e da adição, é uma distinção que é vista pela atitude funcional. Parece que há um equilíbrio, parece que vai procurar por um equilíbrio ontológico entre o humano e a parte tecnológica do acoplamento. Para a tese da virtuosidade extensiva, os módulos que podem ser funcionalmente equivalentes seriam a questão do agente que é acoplado, attached to, juntado ali, e tem também o agente que é conectado com um pedaço de tecnologia. Por exemplo, o attached to, os dois significam conectados, mas tem essa diferenciação aqui, que attached to seria um sentimento de compulsão. E no caso, o professor volta com o exemplo dos smartphones, como os jovens que não conseguem parar de rodar a sua timeline ali de notícias, etc. Já no sentido de tecnologia connected, que você fica conectado com ela, é a questão dos óculos. Ele dá novamente os exemplos dos óculos, porque existe uma ideia de cooperação, um sentimento de cooperação, um senso de integração e extensão da ação. Por exemplo, outro exemplo que está aqui no slide são os smartwatches, envolvendo a construção de persistência nos corredores, ao trabalhar a questão do batimento cardíaco em questões de saúde.
So, one of the things that seem to be important in developing virtue ethics in relation to this area is involving the tools from phenomenology. And obviously, especially post-phenomenology had a great role in developing ethics of technology and philosophy of technology since mid-1980s. But it seems to me that virtue ethics has, in a sense, neglected this influence. And it is necessary for developing an adequate account of how would we feel to work as an extended self. Again, this seems to work best for local virtues, for virtues such as devoted to very narrow contexts and very specialized acting. I gave the example of running. Sport would be one of the main examples. but not necessarily the same applies to each character trait taken as such. That would also call for kind of an active blow that's similar to the cognitive blow in cognitive science, which means that there is a range of extension, which means that technology extends the agent, but it's still the agent who is the core of the action. And even though the evaluation of the character of the agent takes into account the technology they're connected with, it is still the extended agent, but with the stress put on the agent that is being evaluated.
Então, aqui temos que é importante desenvolver a questão da virtuosidade ética, e tem algumas áreas de influência que ainda são negligenciadas. No caso aqui temos a fenomenologia de ser uma ação estendida, ou de ser estendido, ou de ser uma ação estendida, no caso com foco nas virtudes locais, o esquema corpóreo e o inchaço ativo, entre aspas. Se refere a uma tecnologia que estende o agente, mas que o agente ainda está no foco da ação. O professor mencionou novamente a questão de corridas com os smartwatches e os esportes, é um exemplo. E apesar de essa avaliação de caráter levar em conta a tecnologia, e apesar disso, essa avaliação de caráter leva em conta a tecnologia com a qual eles estão conectados. Eles são estendidos por essa tecnologia, uma extensão.
So, does the extension means alienation? Is extended self an alienated self? It seems to be a kind of danger which is connected with the level of personalization of this technological extension. But in a sense, when we look outside of this social critique scope of technology, we would see that to a degree we incorporated technology into our lives on a daily basis that reach beyond the technological regimes of industrial society, and they just became ours in the sense that, for instance, again, my glasses are part of my body schema. But in terms of virtue ethics, that seems to call for a kind of technological phronesis. And just as the classical account of phronesis would be an account of a virtue which allows us to navigate between different axiological regimes or various practices, the technological phronesis would be the kind of virtue that allow us to build kind of a self-awareness as navigating between different technological regimes. I will skip the part about the notebook because it seems unrelevant here, and perhaps I would have to spend some longer time explaining it. But what is important is that extension to become mine would need a kind of justification, which is the distinction that I introduced before would allow us to see the attachment to certain technologies as being imposed, whereas some others are quite beneficial to ourselves. And to make the extension part of phronetic attitude would require the agent, from the agent, the ability to decide on whether there are certain goods that the technology brings to their life. So the questions that this virtuous, the extended virtuous person would have to ask themselves would be what new good it brings to me, how it makes possible obtaining new goods, and what new qualities become available thanks to being extended in this way.
Essa questão da extensão, ela leva a algumas perguntas, como, por exemplo, Será que realmente essa tecnologia de extensão leva a uma alienação? E o quão meu, entre aspas, é essa extensão? No caso dos óculos, ele menciona novamente os óculos, uma citação do professor: meus óculos são partes do meu esquema corpóreo. Até que ponto isso é uma alienação? Então, temos aqui os limites de personalização, que os regimes tecnológicos e as ações de reedificação levam a essas questões. A consciência pessoal e a froneses tecnológica se relacionam ao controle sobre o nível de integração e conexão de acordo com o florescimento, com bem sucedido o agente é. Ele pulou essa parte em relativo à questão do caderno dos suplementos de caderno do Otto, porque ele disse que se tornaram irrelevantes aqui para a discussão, e foi direto para a última parte, que diz que essa extensão das virtudes, essa extensão virtuosa das máquinas, ela leva a algumas questões em que algumas máquinas, alguma parte da tecnologia, ela foi, de certa forma, imposta, enquanto outras são mais beneficiais aos seres humanos. Então, essa extensão, para se tornar minha, entre aspas, ela precisa de uma justificação. E levanta novamente algumas questões. O quanto de novidade boa essa tecnologia leva para o agente? E como é possível obtê-la? E quais são as novas qualidades que se tornam disponíveis?
And I would like to end by stressing a handful of questions which seem to be important for further developing virtue ethics in reference to technology. So firstly, if virtues are excellences in acting, is there an excellence that is in relation to the use of technology? Except for what I call the technological phronesis. And perhaps a more general question would be, what is the adequate way of depicting the virtuous agent, which is, or whose activity is augmented by their use of technology? How should we proceed? And should we, as I said, proceed by involving the tools of phenomenology? Thirdly, can human beings flourish independent of their technological environment? And it seems to me that any normative program, any kind of ethics which aims at liberating man from technology, requires the way in which it intends to compensate for the possibilities of action provided by technology.
Então, nós temos aqui a conclusão, com um quote que o professor não leu, mas lerei aqui agora. Se o tempo corpóreo e a extensão do espaço corpóreo e o espaço externo formam um sistema prático, o primeiro ser do contexto, contra qual o objeto tem como objetivo a sua ação, nossa ação, deve se ressaltar ou se abster em frente àqueles que devem vir à luz. É claramente uma ação de que a espacialidade de nosso corpo está vindo até a vida, está levando à vida. Então, temos algumas questões que o professor levanta para a conclusão, que se as virtudes são excelentes em ação, há alguma excelência na relação do uso da tecnologia? E qual é a forma adequada de mostrar um agente virtuoso? A virtuosidade extensiva e a fenomenologia são algumas das opções. E o florescimento humano é independente da tecnologia? E há algum programa normativo almejado a liberar, entre aspas, o homem da tecnologia requer definir o modo com o qual se almeja compensar pelas possibilidades de ação providas pela tecnologia?
Thank you so much, and thank you, Luisa, for the translation.
Muito obrigada a todos.
Thank you, Piotr. Alguém tem perguntas?
If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Mais fácil.
Hello, Peter. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi.
Good seeing you. Thank you so much for your presentation. I have many questions. So I'm going to try and just synthesize or choose. So basically, I think the main challenge to think of virtuous machine is that are the contingencies, and I don't see, even with the evolution of algorithms, how can a machine respond to the contingencies. So I wonder if I really like more the second part of your presentation, in which you talk about this potential extension of human capacities through technology. And my reaction is that the inquiry could be much more fruitful if you focus, or I wonder to what extent have you done this, focus on the interactions and the relationship system, because I really like your question of the virtue of the engineers and the designers, or the moral dispositions, I think is that how you put it. So I think if you explore more those interactions within the system between designers, creators, providers of the technology, users with the machine, then there's this is a very rich terrain in which evidently machines have the potential to hinder or to foster more virtuous action. Now, then you go to this idea of a cyborg, really, a choice-assisted cyborg or a morally assisted cyborg in this, connection of the machine and the person. And I wonder to what extent is that not already a reality? And you give one of your examples as the Apple Watch, but there are so many other devices, for example, the Oura Ring. So you just wear this ring and it gives you all this data, and then you make better choices or not, I don't know, which lead you to flourishing, right? Which lead you to well-being or to happiness. And that's exactly the idea of the Oura Ring. And I wonder to what extent just inviting our students, or us even, to deliberate with ChatGPT. Is ChatGPT a potential dialogue partner to make better choices, just because it will help you see your blind spots of the biases that you may have, or just what are the virtues that need to be cultivated in your own life or in a particular context and situation. And it's the person, the one who brings the contingencies to that dialogue. So I wonder to what extent is that not already a reality, and then what we have to discuss in that reality. And I am very curious on that systems and relationships, because I hope you would be there in my presentation this afternoon, which is about technology in a sense, but it's too late for you and it's in Spanish. And it's just about using YouTube as a platform for the public philosopher. And this has a lot of potentialities, but also limitations, which are given through the governance of YouTube and the pull and dictatorship and tyranny of the algorithm, and what that does to both creators and users. So those are just my reactions. I'm very interested in seeing how these relationships and systematic conditions can lead us to more virtuous action and then to flourishing.
Right, thank you so much. There's plenty of issues, so I'll pick up on the three main. So, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Right, so starting from the last point, the YouTube and the use of platforms, that was something very, very different. They are ways of, that areas, or arenas actually, in which we need to follow certain rules. And the question is really, it seems to me, being not that much about, well, it is, of course, a moral question, but it's also a political question on the control of the public sphere. which is something very different from what I have in mind. There is obviously the issue of cyborgs and cyborgization. I'm quite reluctant to going into it because it seems to me very ill-defined. There is a range of definitions of cyborgs on the table, and it doesn't seem to me that any of it is very much working. I'm quite sympathetic to what you said about the interactions. And there's obviously the entire field of human-machine interactions, and there is plenty of attitudes that we can incorporate to this. But it seems to me that addressing the relation between humans and technology in terms of interactions is giving them, in a sense, similar, or perhaps not a similar, but it's giving them mutual place in the relation in terms of being equally, perhaps not equal, but equally engaged in a sense. What I mean by this is that in the interaction, we have a certain area in which we meet for a period of time, and there's an exchange. There is interaction in terms of physical, perhaps intellectual, perhaps emotional, if you take the applications, some of the applications. What I have in mind when I'm discussing this extended virtue model is the way in which the technology comes into everyday routine, and it's becoming adapted to a quite well, let me stress this. It has been a long day, sorry. What I have in mind is the kind of use of technology in which it's becoming a part of a daily routine, and it's becoming part of acting in a way in which we don't see them, we don't see the technologies that we use as something that we interact with, but perhaps something that we interact through. So, for instance, I built my persistent in running, or I built my health by monitoring my pulse, my hydration, and stuff like that. And I do this by outsourcing some of the attention that I would have to put into this ways of acting into technology I use, like for instance the smartwatch. So when I'm spending a lot of time at the desk, as I do now, it would be the smartwatch will monitor my hydration and nudge me to have a drink, for instance. And because it becomes a part of a daily routine, it's not considered by the agent as an interaction, but just as a part of themselves. And because of this, the interaction model seems to be too narrow for some of these technologies. And I agree, it's part of the everyday life these days. The question is rather whether the range of these interactions, I don't have really better word now, or this couplings that we form is limited, or can we expect new forms of assemblages showing up? I assume in some, especially professionalized areas of life, this would be the case. And that's why I give priority to the local virtues. because it seems to me that in many respects, in some vocational jobs especially, the integration of the technology that people use is so that it integrates with their moral life and cannot be taken as a interaction between the agent and the tool, but it becomes part of who they are.
Yeah, I think your answer makes sense. I think it's a matter of very little time for us to see that embeddedness or transparency, as you were mentioning, between the technology and the person.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, thank you. I think there's another question here. So,
Right, thank you.
no, so
Não, mas se alguém quiser. Vai lá. If there is no more question, what I would ask, she already done the question. That's how, because this kind of cyborg, it's not a reality. I think myself, for example, I have to use glasses. I have to use medicines all the time. Now I will have to buy a kind of
hearing assistance.
hearing assistant because my ear. So we are becoming cyborgs. So this is now reality.
But this is really a question. And
That's why the content of virtue is now, we have now to consider all the time how this virtuous content is not related just only humans, but together with the machines, with the technological artifacts that are around us all the time. So the quality of our actions are always mediated by the artifact, by the technical systems. That's it.
yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned it, because I omitted the part about the Otto's notebook. This is the famous example made by Clark and Chalmers themselves in the extended mind paper. And it seems to me it's perplexing in a sense that actually the Otto's notebook, as you know, Otto has an Alzheimer disease and he cannot remember the places. So he makes notes in his notebook, and whenever he wants to go somewhere, he needs to consult his notebook in order to get to the place. Right? But this is really not the case of extending his possibilities, but rather supplementing something that is not working well enough, right? So that's pretty much the same that can be said about our glasses. But it seems to me that with these technologies that we have on the table right now, really become extended in the sense that we can monitor ourselves and obtain a kind of self-knowledge that we never had opportunity to have. And through this, we can make morally better decisions and perhaps more accurate ones. And this is a very new situation. And as I answered to Tatiana, it's not only a matter of interacting with the tool and through this obtaining some knowledge, but rather building ourselves in a new way. And that's something that I assume should be addressed from the philosophical point of view, just in order to prepare the tools for addressing perhaps even deeper cyborgization, as you call it. I think your mic is off. I can hear you. I think your microphone is off.
We have to change all the time because we didn't fix all the technical issues here.
Right.
If you did the
The technology is tricky, isn't it?
Yes, very, very. So no, there is no more questions, and we are going to finish.
So thank you so much for having me. It was really an honor.
Thank you very much for being here for your conference, and I hope you can participate in our next symposium.
I hope so. Could you send me the link?
And maybe in person, not only mediated by these technological artifacts.
Right. I would very much like. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.